I want to open by just reading you a short review. Tim Challies. I like introducing you to just different people that can help you grow in your walk with the Lord. And one of those guys is Tim Challies. If you're not familiar with him, Tim Challies is one of the most productive Christians I know. I mean, I don't even know how he does everything he does, but he's even written a book on productivity if you want to be more productive. Tim Challies is one of the most productive people I know. He's a pastor. He blogs. He's one of the top reviewers on Amazon. He's been in the top 50 reviewers for years. He has a book company. He's written a bunch of books. He writes a book about every 6 months. He speaks all over the place. But one of the things he does is every day, if you follow his site, and if you go to the back page, oh, you know what? I didn't put it in here. Sorry about that. Maybe I did. Oh, yeah, I did. On page 3, challies.com. So if you go to that website, you could subscribe to it. And basically, Monday through Saturday, you will get an email. And you can read it, but usually he has articles on there that he writes. And then he has like the top 5 to 10 Christian articles for that day from the web on different topics that you can just click on and it takes you there. And then he has Kindle deals. That's why I love Kindle. So I have a list of over 1,000 books on my Kindle that I'm just watching to see when the price goes down. And when the price goes down, like this morning, I got 4 books for $1.99 each that were all over 20 bucks. Okay, so he has a list of both Christian books and secular books that can help you in different ways. I'm a voracious reader. I'm always reading all kinds of stuff. And one of the reasons I do that is exactly because of building bridges with lost people. So if I run into somebody who's really into baseball, I know about baseball. We immediately have that bridge to baseball. So when Dana and I were in Newport Beach, we spent 2 hours in a jacuzzi with two lesbian partners, had a great conversation with them for 2 hours, talked about all kinds of stuff, but the bridge was, we were in Southern California, and those of you know, now I don't follow baseball so much, but at one time, you know, I was a big Dodger fan, and they were big Dodger fans, and they lived close to Dodger Stadium, so that was our bridge. But because I recently read a biography by Ron Say, he was a third baseman for the Dodgers in the 70s, I was really up to date on a lot of Dodger stuff. And so I was bringing out all this stuff and just wowing them with my Dodger information. And then it took us to other deeper subjects that are more important. And again, just planting seeds. But I do that I read military books. I know a lot about the Civil War, about World War I, World War II. That's fading because a lot of those people are dead. There aren't too many people around from that time period. But when I talk to military people, I immediately know who the generals are, who the commanders are, what the wars are, what the dates are, all that kind of stuff. Why do I do that? Because I'm really into war? No. Because I want to build bridges with military people. Okay, people that are in the military. So we can't do that for everything, but again, I don't like to waste time, and so one of the things I do is I'm constantly reading different worldviews, different things that are going on in the world to be able to build bridges with people, and Greg Koukl does that very well, as you see. Okay, so I want to read this review from Tim Challies, and again, it's a short review, but I think he does a good job of an overview of this book. And so he starts on page 1, Greg Koukl's books, Tactics, which was our great book last month, and Story of Reality, which may be one of our great books in the future. And while I have undoubtedly forgotten much of their content, there are a number of takeaways that have stuck with me. The foremost is that when we speak to people who are not Christians, we have not failed if they make no profession of faith in Jesus Christ. Okay, now I want to stop there for a second. This is a really important point, okay? Most people, you and me, most of us, and most people in our church, and most Christians around the world are not closers. Okay, what I mean by that is there's a lot of people, I know a lot of Christians, even in our church, that have never led someone to Christ. Now, usually people that have never led someone to Christ live a life full of guilt. And I just want you to know, well, you have every reason to be guilty if you never talk about Christ. And if you just don't share your faith and you're like a secret agent 007 Christian, I don't want anybody to know I'm a Christian. Well, that's another issue. But again, for people who do love Jesus and love talking about Jesus, and if you've never led someone to Christ, I just want you to know that's okay. And how he closes the book, if you read it all the way through, he talks about this girl that he was on a bus with for about 15 minutes. She invited him to a Bible study. That's all she did. But as a result of that girl just inviting him to a Bible study, he attributes his salvation to that first seed that was planted by that girl. Okay? And the reality is, many of us are Christians for the same reason. Somebody planted a seed, maybe that we don't even know who they are. And a lot of you who are grandparents, your children and grandchildren may not be walking with the Lord now, but it may happen after you die, through the seeds that you plant, through the prayers that you pray, through the life that you model, through the things that you teach, and so forth. And I just want you to know that this book is so encouraging, especially for those of you who's like, man, I wish I could, you read what Greg Koukl does, I wish I could do that. But again, he even admits that he hasn't led anybody to Christ in years. Okay? But again, I read this stuff and go, I believe that. That's true. This is so good. And how can people not come to Christ with these kinds of arguments? But again, who saves people? You?
Jesus.
No, God does. And so his big point, one of his big points in this book is Christians need to consider themselves, you're a gardener. And it's the same thing. Many of us have gardens, and some of you have green thumbs, and some of you, like me, don't. And so you see lots of things that you plant and spend a lot of money on and watered a lot and fertilized and everything die. But you're definitely not going to have any plants or any fruit or any vegetables without the gardening. Okay, there's a process of watering, feeding, taking care of, and so forth. Yeah?
I personally know 3 people whose children came to Christ at their funerals.
Yes.
Yeah,
It happens.
Yeah.
So don't give up. Keep praying.
Yeah, no. So again, I think this book is just so encouraging because you read a lot of evangelism books you read, and it's the person telling of this person that led to Christ and that person that led to Christ, and you're thinking of your own life and going, how come I can't do that? How come I don't see that? And some of you do, but most people don't. And so it's just encouraging. I think it's really encouraging to read this book and go, okay, I'm okay with being a gardener. And I'm okay with being faithful in gardening, and God will provide the fruit at some point. And I trust in him. And I'm going to pray for these people, and I'm going to love these people, and I'm share with these people. So I love that about Greg Koukl's approach. So then Challies continues. He says, while that may be our ultimate desire, that is, people making professions of faith in Christ, and a good and noble goal for any spiritual conversation, is to simply put a proverbial pebble in their shoe, to give them something to think about, something that will challenge their worldview, something that may nag at their souls in the days or weeks to come. So honestly, I view the conversation that Dana and I had with these 2 lesbians that were, I doubt they were believers, but I let them know I was a pastor. And we talked a little bit about Christian type things or Christian worldview type things. They weren't obstinate or anything. They're actually very open. As a matter of fact, if they lived close to us, they would be the type of people that we would invite over for dinner or coffee or whatever and continue the relationship. But what I think happened in that, the victory in that time with them, is I think if they had any kind of negative view of Christians, that was changed in that, because we really enjoyed our time with them. And I think they would say they enjoyed their time with us. A lot of the time was talking about pickleball. They're really into pickleball, and we were playing pickleball, so we're talking about pickleball. But again, other things as well. And again, what our hope is that they had a positive view of what Christians are like in that encounter. And then hopefully they'll meet some other Christians along the way that will take them further than we were able to in that time. Okay, so a pebble in the shoe, this is a big idea that he gives in tactics, and it's a big idea that he gives in street smarts. And what's the idea of leaving a pebble in someone's shoe, and why is that such a good idea? Okay, just some of you have already read both books. Yeah, Michelle?
It gets them thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets them thinking. And that's huge, right? In our culture, to get somebody to think, that's huge. Huge. Somebody to use common sense. Wow, what a concept. But yeah, it's a big deal. Jim?
Well, you can't ignore it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's there.
Yeah.
You got to deal with it.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I have had the privilege of leading, I don't know, I've probably led over 100 people to Christ personally, just in a conversation with them many times it's over time, in, close to, about 50 years of being a Christian. So that's maybe 2 a year, 1 or 2 a year. But I don't consider myself to have the gift of evangelism. I don't consider myself to be particularly gifted in evangelism. But when somebody does come to faith, it's amazing how many of those have come to me after time and said, I can't stop thinking about this. Probably the thing I've heard more than anything else, because I don't steer away from hell. And he talks about this here, and he gives the example of hell. He says a lot of people, a lot of Christians shy away from hell, and there are a lot of Christians that don't even believe in hell today. But the reality is, Jesus talked more about hell than he did heaven. Well, why? Because Jesus was warning people of the reality of what awaited them. And it would be evil of Jesus to not warn them. Okay? Just like if somebody is talking to you and they're in the middle of the street and a bus is approaching them and the bus is not slowing down, get out of the way. Yeah. Would they after jumping out of the way of the bus get mad at you for saying, why did you do that? I can't believe you told me about the bus. It was just about to kill me. No, they would thank you. Well, it should be the same. If hell is real, and we believe it is, to not warn somebody of that, I think, would be evil. Now, it doesn't mean that you spend all your time just, saying you're about, like I did when I was a little kid, lighting matches in front of people's faces and saying, this is going to be you in eternity, No. But, again, if a doctor evaluates you and you had an MRI and there's this big lump near your brain, it would be evil of him to not mention, well, what's that big thing? Oh, that's a lump. Is it cancer? Well, it could be, But you know what? It's okay. God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, and doesn't do anything about that. Well, I think that would be evil. I would hope you would change doctors if you find that out. So again, the reality is, like you said, Jim, putting a pebble in someone's shoe makes them think about, what if this is true? Maybe it's not true, and I don't think it's true, but what if it is true? What difference would that make? And so a lot of the people that I've seen personally come to Christ, a lot of the time they're wrestling with, I couldn't sleep. I've had several people say, ever since you told me about hell, I keep having these dreams where I'm burning in hell. And it's terrifying. And so I decided I'm going to read the Gospels. And as I read the Gospels, it was like, wow, I think this is true. So, but it was a pebble that started them thinking, to not being able to sleep, to not being able to think about anything else, to going, I'm not right with God, to going, how do I get right with God? And then they come to Christ. So is that worth it? Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So he continues, where some people understand evangelism only through a harvesting approach. And again, I think that's the way most evangelism books are, in which anything less than conversion means failure. The gardening approach means we are content to do the planting or watering, trusting that God may give someone else the joy of harvesting. Okay, that approach is again on display in his new book, Street Smarts, which is not quite a sequel to Tactics, but is still related to it. If you haven't read Tactics, you will benefit from Street Smarts, but if you have read the former, you'll find that the latter furthers the principles with concrete teaching related to today's foremost challenges to believing the gospel. There are few things that cause more nagging guilt for Christians than sharing their faith, he says. They feel guilt because they don't witness enough. They don't witness enough because they're scared. And they're scared for good reason. Sharing the gospel and defending it, apologetics, often feels like navigating a minefield these days. For most of us, engaging others on spiritual matters does not come easy, especially when people are hostile. And this is the reason we tend to stay off the streets. Just as we avoid parts of a city where we feel unsafe, we avoid contexts and situations in which we feel especially vulnerable. The purpose of Street Smarts is to provide training that will equip readers to address the most common contemporary challenges to their convictions. It is to give Christians a greater degree of confidence as they engage with people who do not share with their Christian faith and who may be antagonistic toward it. The way Koukl does this is not to provide responses to every criticism or answers of every question. Rather, he teaches us a technique that he has used for years and taught to many others. Those who have read Tactics or been to one of his seminars will recognize it as his Columbo technique. Okay, and again, the Columbo technique is basically what? As you understand it, especially if you've already read Tactics and Street Smarts, what is he doing when he talks about the Columbo tactic, and why is that a good tactic to use?
Humility.
What's that?
Humility.
Okay, yeah, it involves humility, yeah, for sure.
Ask questions so the person clarifies what
Exactly.
they're thinking.
Exactly. Yeah, so the main reason you ask why he refers to Columbo is exactly the way Columbo did in an episode, if you've ever watched Columbo. The first part of a Columbo movie, I think there was about 73 of them made total for a period of about 30 years. I have all of them. I've seen all of them. I can tell you about every single one of them. But what always happens is somebody does a murder. It's usually a very smart or wealthy person. They think they've figured out everything and they're never going to get caught. And then Columbo shows up on the scene. And usually Columbo always knows immediately who the murderer is. But he has to spend the rest of the episode proving it. He has to get evidence to convict that person. And the way he always begins is he asks the murderer questions. Okay? And he drives them crazy with questions. Okay? As a matter of fact, I think by the end of the episode, a lot of times they just want to give themselves up. It's like, just get me away from this guy. You know, it's like, he knows me too well, you know? And, but again, it's a great picture and it's a great example for us as Christians. Not to want people to say, get this person out of my life, but to be able to ask questions in such a way that they feel uncomfortable because they have to deal with reality. That's the pebbledy in the shoe. It's like, they know me. They know I'm in trouble. They've identified things about me that I wish they hadn't, but now I've got to deal with it because this is reality. And so the Columbo types of questions, and there are many, the advantage for us is you don't have to know a lot. Okay, you don't have to know everything about this person. But when you ask questions, you start finding out about them. So for instance, a question that I've asked a lot with a lot of people who claim to be atheists is I say, here's a Columbo question. You know, for clarification, what do you mean by, when you say you're an atheist, what do you mean by that? I'd like to hear about the God you don't believe in. Okay? That's a Columbo question. And what happens then is you usually find out that when they give a definition of the God they don't believe in, that's not the definition of God, period. What it is, it's a caricature of something they think God is like, and they don't like that, so therefore they run from that and hide from that and do their own thing. But what they're running from and hiding from isn't the God of the Bible. And so if I know that person well enough, I move forward to the point where I get them to finally ask me, what is God like? Okay? In other words, they start asking me, instead of me saying, you're an idiot for not believing in God. What a fool. You know what the Bible says? The fool says in his heart, there's no... Now that's true. But if I start my talk with that person today, in today's culture, they're not gonna respond to that well. Okay, if I call them, you're a fool for not believing in God. Yes, that's true. But am I going to get to first base with this person now? No. But if I say, tell me about the God you don't believe in. And you know what happens oftentimes? They'll tell me about their fathers. You know, there's 4 books written by a psychologist. He's a Catholic psychologist named Paul Vitz. And all of his books are on what he calls the psychology of atheism. And whether you take Freud, Jung, Nietzsche, all the famous atheists, even modern day famous atheists, you know what the one common denominator every single one of them had? A bad relationship with their earthly father. Every single one of them. As a matter of fact, a terrible relationship with their earthly father. Every single one of them. So, for them, it's not that they don't believe in their God because there's not enough evidence. It's a psychological reason they don't believe in God. And that's exactly what Paul says in Romans 1. Why do people not believe in God? Because they want to suppress the truth in their own unrighteousness. Now, their unrighteousness means they want to rebel against something that they think is like God, but it's not. And so they're actually rebelling against, they think they're rebelling against, or they say there's no God or whatever, but what they're really doing is they're running away from a perception of what God, they think God is like, but in actuality is ironic because he's not like that at all. Okay? So, as Christians, in today's world, with the hostility towards what we believe and why we believe it, whether it's sexual stuff, male, female, identity issues, gender issues, all the stuff he talks about, and he does a great job of showing how to build bridges with these people and ask good questions with these people. But what he's doing is he's showing them that their worldview, their perception of our worldview is actually false. But if we tell them you're wrong at the outset, or if we tell them you're an idiot, you're foolish, you're whatever, we've just destroyed the bridge. And now we got to spend a lot of time building that back up if we're going to have any kind of a conversation with them. So I just want you to know that from personal experience, what Greg Koukl does is very hard. He makes it look easy, but it's very hard. But one thing that you have to do with non-believers is it's not about winning an argument. It's about winning a person. And in order to win a person, what Sherry said, love and humility, the two biggest attributes that we see in the New Testament. Okay, love mentioned 50 times in the New Testament, humility mentioned 40 times. The 2 biggest attributes for Christians that we're to exhibit. If somebody comes across loving and humble to you, you're going to respond well. If they come to you as a know-it-all who wants to win and is prideful and arrogant, what do you want to do? You want to run. You want to challenge them, or you want to run? And unfortunately, there are Christians out there, not a lot, but there are Christians out there who do know their stuff, but all they want to do is win. And if you win an argument but lose the person, in my opinion, you've lost. You've totally lost. So what Greg Koukl does really well, and I hope this is something that why you need to reread this book and put into practice what he tells you to do, is because he really comes across as winsome. Even in difficult issues, with difficult people, with people that are very hostile to Christians, the way he responds to them is in such a way that they have to defend their position. And so it puts them on the defense, not you. And all you're doing is asking questions. You're saying, I just want clarification. So you're telling me that, is this what you believe? And then you spell it out. And then you can keep moving. But the whole time you're giving them, what they're doing is they're trying to defend their position. Now, if their position is false, it's ultimately they're going to run out of things to say. So once they run out, what happens? Then they ask you, well, what do you think? That's the goal. But if you tell them what you think right away, you lose them. Okay? So if you don't get anything else out of tactics and street smarts, that's one of the most important things you can get, is be like Columbo and ask God for wisdom to be able to go, okay, God, what's a good first question that I can ask this person? And one of them is clarification. So even on politics, okay, I'm very conservative in my politics. But if I talk with somebody, like when I see a sticker of somebody the opposite, of what I believe, immediately my first thought, and I'm just being honest with you, is I'm going, how in the world can this person vote for this person?
Yeah.
That's my first thought. And initially I'm mad. I'm angry. It's like, and so I have to go to the Lord and I have to repent and, this whole thing. But every once in a while what will happen is we'll pull into the same parking lot. And every once in a while I have time and I'll go up to the person and I'll say, I'm just curious. I noticed this sticker on your car. I'm just curious because for me personally, I would really have a hard time voting for this person. But obviously you are. So can you give me like two or three solid reasons why you're voting for this person? Now here's what typically happens. They don't have any. They don't have any. They usually say they hate the person I'm voting for.
Yeah, it's mostly just...
That's what usually happens. And so it's like, okay, so you're voting for this person who stands for basically all the opposite things that this person stands for, but why? Can you back up those reasons? Why are those good for society? Why is that good for is that going to help our culture flourish, and in what way? And again, the issue, usually in politics, most people that I've talked to, they have no answers. But see, what I've done is I put a pebble in their shoe. Okay? They may be, first of all, they're startled because nobody does this. But what I hope happens is I've given them pebbles in their shoe. And it's like, why am I voting for that? There should be a better person than I hate this person, and I'm voting for this. But again, this is the type of thing that you just need to think about, pray about, watch for wisdom. But the worst thing you can do is start off a relationship with somebody you disagree with in a hostile way. Yeah.
What I'm running, as we all are, people want to start with the conclusion. Like, oh, you're going to vote for him, or, So it's not that you want to be, what you just described is great if you can go back to the process.
Yeah.
How they arrive, or don't give away, don't show your cards.
Yeah.
That you're a Christian or whatever. And that's hard to do.
Yeah.
But people do want to talk. People are lonely.
Yeah. Yeah.
People do want to talk. So if you can get them talking,
yeah.
Then
Yeah.
you can kind of
I think it really is true, and I think you need to be. If you're like me, if you're wired like me, again, if you're the type of person like me that you see a sticker on their car and it makes you angry, then you're the type of person that also needs to take that anger to the Lord and say, okay, this person is lost, most likely. They don't know you. They haven't read the Bible. They haven't experienced grace. They don't know what mercy is. I mean, they want, like any human being, to be loved. They want to be accepted, whatever. But to get yourself into the mindset that this person is lost, they're dead spiritually, and the only thing that's going to wake them up is the Holy Spirit, and how God can use me in this person's life to get them at least a step forward towards you.
Yeah.
And see them as a person they're not just in a desperate state, they're dead spiritually. Okay? So only God can resurrect the dead. You can't, I can't. However, He does use the means of us to be able to reach people. And so again, it's to take that hostile, again, that could be me. I could have that sticker in my car if God had not intervened in my life. Or I could be in this homosexual relationship if had God not intervened in my, whatever, whatever the sin may be, the thing that keeps you from God. But the reality is, oftentimes these people go unchallenged. And in our culture, not only is most of what they believe unchallenged, it's not challenged at all, so they're enabled to continue in their sin. And again, if they don't see themselves as sinners, they can never receive the gospel. You don't want the gospel unless you see yourself as a sinner. So it takes work now to get somebody to see themselves as a sinner. And that's where we have to be intelligent and smart in this. Okay, let me continue. So his training consists in two parts. First, he explains the challenges and provides compelling answers to them. In this way, the reader comes to understand not only common concerns and appropriate responses, but also the weaknesses inherent in the common positions. Second, he shows how to make use of the knowledge of those weaknesses to tactfully expose them in a precise way. This is meant to give Christians shrewd but gentle confidence in their engagements with skeptics. Simply put, he says, I want to make a hard job easier for you, much easier. I'm going to show you how to maneuver effectively. Effectively and comfortably in conversations using questions to answer the challenges you face as a Christian. I will give you both the content you need and the plan necessary to employ it. By confronting the giants one by one, I will shrink them down to size for you. I will show you how to make the case that the Christian view of reality is true. Again, one of the ones that he tackles extensively here is he gives probably, I think, about 10 dialogues with somebody who's pro-choice. Now, with somebody who's pro-choice, as a Christian, what's the number one? He says the only thing, you only need to focus on one thing. With anybody who's pro-choice, what is that one thing? So in other words, what knowledge do you have to have about one thing in order to be able to get to first base with somebody who's pro-choice? What does he say that one thing is?
The fetus is actually a person.
Yes. Yeah, what is it?
Choice.
What is inside this woman? Okay. Now, one of the most brilliant things he does there, and I don't know about you, this is the first time I ever saw this, is he talks about John the Baptist and Jesus, and shows in the New Testament how both John the Baptist and Jesus are mentioned by name as human beings, one in the first trimester and one in the third trimester. Yeah, first and third trimester. So here you have, again, and the argument today is this is just a blob, this is just a piece of tissue, and what have you. But what he does is he brilliantly shows you how all you do is you take what they've said and you turn it in on them. And even just saying, okay, if a cat is pregnant, what is that cat likely to have? A cat.
Puppies.
If a woman is if a human being who's a woman is pregnant, what's that woman going to have? Okay, baby. Human being. Okay.
John, as they recognized Jesus when Mary came in.
Right. So again, though, so what he does is he takes all these different pro-choice, all the big ones, all the ones that all the pro-choice people use, and turns them on their head by just asking questions. And again, he does that extensively. He does it. He has. I think all his dialogues are really good. As a matter of fact, it's sort of like you like to take a little Greg Koukl with you in your pocket everywhere you go, and set him loose on these people because he just does such a good job. But again, when you read that, when you know that, you have to have knowledge. You have to have some knowledge. Okay, you can't defend the pro-life position unless you have to have a position. And on what basis do you have your position? And again, I think now it gives me more ammunition, because I usually go to Psalm 139, that God's forming that child in the womb. But again, this is even a better case, I think, in the New Testament. And again, it's hard to believe, but there are people who profess Christ that are pro-abortion. Usually those people don't last too long in our church. Because again, I'm very outspoken on this, and I'll go to the mat on this, and I'll die for this. I think it's the worst thing in our time. I think it's the worst sin of our time, that all these babies are being murdered every day, every minute. And again, to justify it in any way, shape, or form. But people are ignorant. And this is what the mainstream media tells you. This is what a lot of politicians tell you. This is what public schools tell you. Oh, it's just a blob. It's just, it's not a human being. It's whatever. But again, what you do is you don't let them get away with that. You don't let them get away with just saying something that isn't true. And they have to defend it. You don't have to defend it. It's self-evident. Okay? But they have to defend it. And that's why you need to keep pushing them back. And he does that brilliantly with all these issues. It's the same thing, he does the same thing with defending Jesus. And why do we believe he's the Son of God? Why do we believe he rose again? He does a great job of pushing the skeptic back. Because what people tend to do is they just parrot what they've heard. Most people think, if you go to the average person in Marin on the street and say, what do you think the Bible is? Most people say it's a book full of myths. And so the question is, are you an expert in myths? No. Do you know what a myth is? How would you define a myth? They can't. And I said, so you've just told me you don't know anything about myths. You can't even define what a myth is, and yet you've never, have you read the Bible? No. Okay, so you've just heard that the Bible is full of myths, but you haven't checked this out for yourself. Can I tell you what the Bible actually is? Would you be interested in that? Okay? And so again, don't let people get away with it. Okay? All right, he continues. How effectively does he do this? He does it very effectively. The book would fail if it was meant to teach a specific response to each challenge to the gospel. That would simply be too much content to remember when it was needed. But the reader would have to remember a precise series of facts, know when to bring each one to bear, and be left silent when the conversation didn't go his way. An issue we have probably all run into at one time or another in the past. But Koukl teaches a technique, a way to listen attentively and then ask questions meant to expose flaws. This simplifies the task of the evangelist or apologist and accounts for fluidity in conversation. Now, this is really important. So, one of the reasons I'm so intent on teaching theology, teaching through the Bible, helping you understand what is true. Why do I believe this? Do I have convictions that this is true? Is there any evidence for this? Because the more conviction you have, the more specific beliefs you have that put concreteness on this. Can you defend the Trinity? Well, you can't defend it very well if you don't believe it very well, or you don't know what it means, or how to defend that, or what are the points of that? Why is it not a contradiction? Okay, so most people coming from the outside say, you believe that God is three and that God is one. And you say, well, in a certain sense, I believe that. But if I said that God existed and God didn't exist at the same time and in the same relationship, that's impossible. Okay? That's a contradiction. That's a bona fide. He can't exist and not exist at the same time. He either exists or he doesn't exist. One of those is true, one of those is false. And everything rises or falls on that. I mean, the whole worldview and how culture runs is based on whether God exists or he doesn't exist. Okay, so Marxism, cultural Marxism, is based on the fact that God does not exist. And they are absolutely convinced that God does not exist. So therefore, it's not about truth, it's about power. For us, we believe God exists, and therefore we believe that culture should be run on what's true. Because if it's objectively true, that doesn't just mean it's objectively true for those who believe in God. It's also true for those who don't believe in God, if God exists and God is given revelation. So you're going to be that much more effective if you're good in theology and apologetics and know your Bibles. Of course, that's going to help you tremendously, okay? But again, when I talk to anybody from any position that isn't from a Christian worldview, even a Jewish person or a Muslim, they have similar beliefs to us, or even a Catholic. However, there are certain areas where I can't agree with them because I think that what they believe in this area is wrong. Now, I have to put myself in their shoes. So like for instance, for me, a big problem that I have with Catholicism is that they added the Apocrypha to the Bible in the late 1500s at the Council of Trent. Why did they do that? Well, they did it so that they could defend positions that they invented and then say they were biblical by adding the Apocrypha to the Bible. Well, when I talk with a Catholic, that's one of the things I bring up. Is I say one reason I could never belong to the Catholic Church is that you've added something to the Bible that actually contradicts the Bible. And you did it way into your history. Like, this isn't way back when. I mean, it's 500 years ago now, but you had 1,500 years before that where that wasn't the case. And because of this is added doctrines that your forefathers didn't believe in, and now you believe it. And so I asked him, don't you have a problem with that? I have a major problem with that. But you don't have a problem with that? Well, most of them have never even thought about it. They don't even know. Okay? But again, I can't bring up that example if I don't know about it. And I have to be convinced that what they've done is they've added a heresy to their church and to the Bible that was never meant to be taught. So for me, to put all my eggs in that basket, to say I'm going to follow this, I personally can't do that. How can you? How can you do that? Okay? And so for me, honestly, if I'm one-on-one with a person, this is difficult if you're one-on-two or one-on-three. It's always difficult if you're with a group of people. It's easier if you're one-on-one. And so I really encourage you to not get in these kind of arguments unless you're one-on-one. But when you're one-on-one, for me, I'm not very intimidated by that. So I was on a flight once I think I was going to New York. I was on my way to Europe. I was only 19 years old. I was going to Spain. And there was a guy sitting next to me who was a professor at Harvard in philosophy, and he had a PhD. And so we were talking, and I told him I was studying theology, and I wanted to be a pastor, and he laughed. And I said, oh, that's interesting that you laughed. I go, do you know why Harvard was founded? Okay, do you know what the original mission statement of Harvard was? Here's a professor at Harvard. He didn't know, so I said, well, let me show you. And I actually had it in my notes because I happened to be teaching on something that week, and I had the mission statement of Harvard right there, okay, in God's providence. Amazing thing. So I read the mission statement to him. And I said, you know, all the founders of Harvard and the original students would laugh at the fact that you just laughed at me. Because the greatest subject when Harvard was founded in the world at any university was God. And since then, the elites have removed God. And so I asked him, I said, why do you think that is? Do you think it's because there's good reasons to not believe in God, or do you think there's another reason? And I remember asking him that question. Again, this was years ago, but I just remember it like it was yesterday. He looked at me and he said, I've never thought about that. And he goes, yeah, I'm going to think about that. Well, then after that, he didn't see me as just a fool, you know, because again, a lot of atheists think we're fools. They think Christians are fools. You know, it's like, you believe this ancient, superstitious, mythological stuff. But what he saw was that I was actually articulate and intelligent, and I could carry on a conversation. So we talked about a lot of things. I don't really remember anything else that we talked about. I remember that. But after that, he took me seriously. And then afterwards, he said, you know what? The last thing he said to me is, you've given me a lot of food for thought. And then he said, is there if you could recommend one book to me that would articulate your position, what would it be? And I told him, the Bible. I said the Bible. But I said I'd start with John. I'd start with the book of John in the New Testament. It's the fourth book. Read that. Because the most important thing is who is Jesus. And that'll tell you who Jesus is and how to have a relationship with him. So I left him with that. I have no idea what became of him. I hope he became a Christian. But one of the things that happened in that encounter, again, I was 19 years old. But ever since then, I'm a voracious reader because I want to be prepared to talk to any type of person. No matter how educated, uneducated, background, whatever. I mean, I'm reading Asian history right now. I'm trying to understand what is the relationship between China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam. I mean, right now, that's all abstract to me. But we have a lot of Asian people in Marin. And I run into a lot of Asian people, even in our church. I want to know what their background is. I want to know what their history is. I want to have a connection to them so I can understand where they're coming from in their history. Now, can you do that for everyone and everything? Probably not. But I think it's just a wise thing to keep doing, to be able to build conversations into people where they know, wow, this person cares about me. This person is not just an ignorant person. They know about me and they care about me. Okay, so it continues here. Those who read this book will better be equipped to have productive pebble in the shoe conversations with people who hold to atheism, who insist that the existence of evil disproves the existence of God, or at least of a God who is good and merciful, who believe science and faith contradict one another, who spurn Christianity because it denies the morality of abortion, and who are convinced that Christianity is evil because of its positions on marriage, sex, and gender. They will be equipped to understand what the Bible says about those issues and to have productive conversations about them. Conversations that will use respectful questions to expose flaws and hopefully promote further thought, further questions, and potentially saving faith. For those reasons, among others, it is a book well worth reading. Okay, so all I did in the rest of it was I just highlighted some stuff from the very beginning. But in our time together, what I'd like to do is just, in your reading, what are some things you learned? What are some things that stood out to you? And what are some takeaways? And I don't know about you, but after I read Tactics, it's amazing how many doors opened up that month to be able to have conversations with people, and I was able to use specific things I learned from Tactics. And then this month, same thing with Street Smarts, being able to have all kinds of conversations. But for you personally, what are some things you got out of the book, some principles, some tactics in the different issues that he brought up? Yeah, Supan.
When I read, the abortion,
Uh-huh.
I never know all this, how to really defend, because I talked to a Christian friend, and and I talk about, like you said, she said, I'm going to vote for this person. But I said, but they against, they for choice, whatever they call. And then, but she said, well, they have reason.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to defend it, and then after read this, I said, oh, now
Yeah.
I learned that, how to be able to share with her
Yeah.
about, it's life, it's murder.
Yeah.
But for her to think that, that she has reason to do whatever
Right.
she wants.
Yeah.
And I love that. I say,
Yeah.
I can share with her now.
And there's two, Greg Koukl is a good guy to watch. And again, he has a lot of free training on YouTube. You can watch Greg Koukl in debates. You can, again, he's so good. He's such a good person to watch because he's very calm. He doesn't get aggressive. He doesn't get angry. He sticks to the subject. Another guy that does this really well is Ray Comfort. If you type in Ray Comfort talking about abortion, Ray Comfort talking about murder, Ray Comfort talking about whatever, you can find video after video. And Ray Comfort does this literally on the streets. I've witnessed with him. I grew up in Huntington Beach, and that's where he lives. And you regularly see him in Huntington Beach talking to people on the pier, talking to surfers. And Ray Comfort's been doing this for 70 years. So he's really good. He's heard every objection. He's very quick. He's very smart. But what he's really good at is today, most people don't think they've sinned. Most people think they're good. The average person, I'm a good person. I never killed anybody, whatever. Well, what he does then is he's able to, without saying you're a sinner, what he does is he asks them questions about their life, and they end up admitting they're sinners by asking them questions. That's what we have to do. Right? We really have to do that today. Because again, we have to understand that in our culture, people are already hostile towards us. Once they find out we're a Christian, it's sort of like when I see a bumper sticker of another, politician on somebody's car, immediately I'm angry. They're the same way in the opposite direction. Why? Because just by being a Christian, we're encroaching on what they value, which is their idolatries. And their idolatries is what's keeping them from their relationship with the Lord. So we have to get them to see that those idolatries are actually a bad thing. But we can't just tell them it's a bad thing. without them seeing it for themselves, that they really don't have answers for why they believe what they believe. Yeah, Jim.
You know, on abortion, many times they'll say, one will say, it's part of my body and I can do whatever I want.
Right.
Part of the body. And the thing that really hit me was he talked about DNA.
Yeah.
He said, well, actually, they're separate people, separate bodies. And, you know, it's two, it's not just one there.
Yeah.
And so he goes into the DNA argument. And people today are pretty much well educated enough to know what DNA is.
Right.
And so it's a really good argument. I've never thought about that
Yeah.
before.
And again, anytime you can use an argument from science or something that generally people agree on, it's a more powerful argument today, at least to get further in the conversation with them. So yeah, I think that was a really good argument that he used. Yeah, good. All right, Charlie, do you have a question? Oh, okay, you look like you're just stretching, about to stretch. Yeah.
When in the book, the first part, he talked about the guy, Warner, I think, that developed the cold case.
Mm-hmm. J. Warner Wallace, yeah.
Yeah, and just fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, and so J. Warner Wallace, I don't know if you're familiar with him, we'll probably use one or two of his books along the way too. But J. Warner Wallace was a cold case detective in Los Angeles. He's actually been featured on a lot of the shows that are on this kind of thing. And he was an atheist. And for J. Warner Wallace in his 40s, he decided to investigate the Gospels and see whether or not the Gospels were because again, as a cold case detective, a lot of times your case is built on witnesses to a murder, for instance. And so what he did is he took the same approach that he used as a cold case detective in Los Angeles dealing with murder, you know, solving these unsolved cases. He put the same type of scientific hat on in studying the Gospels, and he ended up becoming a Christian. And reading his stuff is really good. If you like murder mystery, you know, if you like Agatha Christie and Columbo and Matlock and murder mystery, all that kind of stuff, then a good guy for you to read is J. Warner Wallace, because what he does in all of his books is every single chapter he gives examples from his own case histories using different names. But what he does is he shows how that's relevant to what the Bible teaches. And it's really interesting. It's really an interesting way to do apologetics.
He has a weekly podcast as well.
He has what?
A weekly podcast.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, a lot of these guys put so much material out, there's no way you could follow all of it. But yeah, he talks very fast, by the way. He's he communicates very quickly, has a very sharp mind. But again, he's a great resource for us as Christians, being able to give evidences for why we believe what we believe. Yeah. Anything else? Any of the, again, the dialogues. Did you find the dialogues helpful? Yeah. Yeah, they're pretty helpful. And again, when you look at them, it's like, as a Christian, if you have a Christian worldview and you know your Bible, it's like, wow, how could anybody not believe this? How could anybody not go with this? But again, what's good is he gets them to see, he gets to put a pebble in their shoe. With all these dialogues, he's putting a pebble in their shoe. And that's really good for us to remember that that's a good first step strategy. You know. All right, anything else on the book?
I just think
Yeah.
of the shallow argument that some people use.
Mm-hmm.
And in the argument, it's talking about whether a fetus is human or not. And he was saying the fetus is a human being,
Yeah.
but not a human person.
Mm-hmm.
He said, so after the birth, you're a human person, so you're entitled to all the rights of a human being.
Right.
Human, but not, if you're a being, you're not entitled.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such a weak argument, but he said you run into those type of things. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the semantics that are used to justify sin. You know, and again, when you look at the extreme examples of that, like Nazi Germany and so forth. But again, I mean, you look at Nazi Germany and it's like, you know, 90% of the churches went with it. 90% of the pastors and churches went with it. And it was just the psychology of the thing, you know? And that's the thing is, our public schools now is a main breeding ground for the indoctrination of cultural Marxism. And again, starting in preschool and kindergarten, teaching kids about gender and, you know, that how dare the doctor pronounce the gender on this baby, you know, without the baby getting to do so. I mean, and they use those kinds of arguments. But again, in order to do that, the starting point for them is there's no God. So if there's no God, then it's whoever has the power to make the decisions. You know, yeah.
And it seems like they use words like pro-choice,
right.
positive words
right.
to support their side,
yeah.
and then bad words like anti-abortion on the
right.
other side.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
The spin.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But again, if we can't, the hard thing, the challenge for us, especially when you know the truth, you want to just say the truth. That's what we want to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's better than not doing anything, I think. But I think it's important to be wise about it. And Jesus was that way. You know, Jesus did this. I mean, when Jesus catches the woman in adultery, he just doesn't go to her, you adulteress, you need to repent. Now, at the end of his time with her, what he does is he confronts all the people that are acting like they're better than her, the Pharisees. And again, we don't know exactly what he wrote in the ground, but he might have wrote their names. He might have wrote the sins that they were involved with. Who knows what he wrote in the... But whatever he wrote, it convicted them enough that they all left. And nobody was there now to judge her. So she now feels safe with him. How did she feel safe with him? Because he came to her in gentleness and respect and love. But then he said, go and sin no more. I forgive you, go and sin no more. So she knew she was a sinner. But if he just came out and called her a sinner, she wasn't ready for that yet. But what happened was he treated her exactly the way a dignified person created in God's image should be treated by all of us. But what he did is he got her to see the reality of who she was and what her need was. And at that point, she was ready to receive the truth. And that's just, and again, we always see that with Jesus. You know, Jesus obviously did that perfectly, and we would like to be able to do that perfectly too. But I think for me, I know for me, my thing, and again, part of it's preaching, because in preaching, generally no one interrupts me when I'm preaching. So I can say whatever I want to say for 45 minutes to an hour. And if people disagree or whatever, they do, and a lot of people never will say anything. But we have somebody that I know that teaches regularly and talked about Jesus being the only way, and somebody walked out. And I've had that happen too, where right when you say something, you can tell they're upset about it and they leave. And what you would hope would happen with that kind of person is that they would want to meet with you and you can have a dialogue. But unfortunately, a lot of people never will take the time to do that. And that's why it's important that we do take the time to do that when we can, if the opportunity arises to do so. Because I feel like anybody who believes that there are other ways than Jesus, give me an hour with them, and I'll at least give them some pretty good reasons why Jesus is the only way. But if I'm just speaking and they believe that all roads lead to heaven, and they haven't thought about the fact that all these roads actually contradict each other, in many cases at the same points. So, you know, for Jewish people and Muslims, and he brings this out in the book, for a Jewish person or a Muslim, it is one of the worst things that we do as Christians. We worship Jesus because they don't believe Jesus is God. So we're the idolaters. You know, we're the ones that are engaged in idolatry. That's what they believe. So we can't get them to see that what we're doing is actually worshiping the real God unless we can build a case for how Jesus actually is God. But without them knowing what those evidences are, what those teachings are, they don't know. They're ignorant of them. And so that's why it's important for us to ask good questions to get to the point where they could say, okay, I could see why you might believe that Jesus is God. And then I could say, well, can I give you some more reasons why I think you should consider that Jesus, not just me, but you should consider Jesus as God? Would you be interested in hearing some more? And when I've done that, most of the time people are open to that.